3,000 years ago, the most powerful rulers on earth were afraid of something. Not a rival empire, not a failed harvest. Something they recorded in formal state documents using the same administrative language their scribes used to log grain shipments and labor rosters. Not prophecy, not liturgy, a warning. Carved into chambers that were sealed immediately after completion and not designed to be opened again. The pyramids are not tombs. Every Egyptologist who has worked the primary sources knows the evidence for that claim is thinner than the textbooks admit. What the structures actually are, what the texts inside them describe in plain administrative Egyptian, is a class of architecture built in direct response to a documented recurring threat. A threat the pharaohs inherited from their predecessors. A threat that predates the first dynasty. A threat that, according to 4 separate inscriptional sources held in 3 national archives, has a specific mechanism, a specific return interval, and a specific physical signature. You were told the pyramids were monuments to power. The texts say they were the only thing that worked last time. If forbidden ancient history is what keeps you up at night, subscribe now. Every week we read what institutional Egyptology files under too inconvenient to publish. The antechamber corridor of the Seti Darn Temple complex at Abydos is designated AK-7 in the Oriental Institute's 1979 survey. Not the King List Chamber tourists photograph, the antechamber, the connecting corridor between the Osirian and the main hypostyle hall. The Oriental Institute's field photograph archive holds 214 images of this corridor under accession series OI-ABY 1979-C. 31 of those images are listed in the accession index. They are not in the digitized collection. 2 separate research applicants have confirmed this discrepancy in writing from the Institute since 2011. The listed images exist on paper. The images themselves do not exist in any accessible form. Mainstream Egyptology classifies the Abydos complex as a standard New Kingdom mortuary temple, the AK-7 corridor described in published surveys as a transitional architectural space with fragmentary inscriptions of limited scholarly interest. That characterization appears in the Oriental Institute's 1981 summary publication. It has not been revised in 40 years. Fragmentary does not mean unintelligible. The inscriptions in AK-7 use formal Old Kingdom hieroglyphic register style in a New Kingdom structure. Old Kingdom formal style in a New Kingdom corridor is not decoration. It is citation. It signals that the content being carved is older than the monument housing it, that the scribes understood themselves to be copying from something earlier, not composing. Egyptologist Kenneth Kitchen referenced a text passage from the upper register of the North Wall in a 1986 footnote, footnote 34, page 412, as containing a chronological formula inconsistent with the surrounding dedicatory context. He did not expand on it. The footnote is the entirety of the published record on that passage. What the formula actually reads, in the literal grammatical sequence Kitchen chose not to reproduce, is a date marker anchored to a celestial cycle, followed by a warning verb. Sekeper, meaning to cause a thing to become, followed by a determinative category used elsewhere, exclusively for geological and atmospheric events. The floods, the desert advance, the river's course change. Not divine anger in the poetic sense. Environmental events in the administrative sense. The passage continues with a construction verb paired with the word for buried structure and a purpose clause, so that the seat of the living may persist through the turning. The turning, not an allegory, not a metaphor for seasonal cycles or dynastic succession. The determinative attached to it is the one Egyptian scribes used for observable physical events that recur on a measurable schedule. The same determinative on flood records. The same determinative on eclipse logs. not a symbol, not theology. A documented recurring event with a predicted return interval, and the pharaohs built accordingly. The coffin texts spell 1080, and its precursor passage on the inner sarcophagus chamber wall of the Pyramid of Unas at Saqqara. Pyramid texts corpus, utterance 600, north wall, lower register. Gaston Maspero excavated the Unas pyramid in 1881. The pyramid texts were translated and published extensively. Utterance 600 is in the standard corpus. What is not in the standard corpus is what the grammar of 3 consecutive lines in the lower register actually produces when you apply the same literalist reading Egyptian engineers used in technical documents, rather than the interpretive frame of cosmological poetry. The passage opens with the address, "You who became high." Standard translation, divine epithet, the primordial mound rising from the waters of chaos. Literal grammatical reading, using the verb keeper as it appears in engineering texts. You who rose to elevation. The same verb form used to describe the raising of an obelisk, the lifting of a capstone, the elevation of a structure above a baseline. The determinative is architectural. What follows is rendered in the standard corpus as solar mythological imagery. Fine for a hymn. But the next 3 lines use a grammatical construction that does not appear anywhere in the hymn corpus. It is the imperative paired with a purpose clause and a material specification. The construction Egyptian scribes used when writing instructions. Read as instructions. Seal the lower chamber with stone of the inner mountain. Place the living above the level of the great water. Let the structure endure through the interval of darkness. The interval of darkness. That phrase carries the same celestial event, determinative, as the turning in the AK-7 corridor. They are describing the same event from different dynasties in different administrative vocabularies. One text from the 24th century before the Common Era. The other copied from source material the scribes themselves placed before the First Dynasty. The interval of darkness is not a night. The night determinative is a star above a flat line. This is a sun below a horizon line, paired with the flood determinative, the rippled water sign. It describes a period of reduced solar input concurrent with elevated water levels. Those 2 conditions occurring simultaneously have one primary natural mechanism in the geophysical record. Jean-François Champollion reviewed the Unas lower register passage in 1828. His private notebooks, held at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France under MSNF 20420, contain a margin notation beside his transliteration of those 3 lines. Architectural rather than sacred in register requires engineering consultation before publication. That consultation was never recorded. The notebooks were not published in full until 1974. The margin notation appears in the 1974 transcription. 146 years in an archive. No engineering consultation was ever published. Nobody followed up. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis was formalized in a 2007 paper, published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences by Firestone and colleagues, and expanded substantially in peer-reviewed literature through 2023. The hypothesis holds that, approximately 12,800 years ago, a fragmenting comet or asteroid cluster impacted or airburst across multiple northern hemisphere sites, triggering rapid global cooling lasting approximately 1,200 years, continent-scale wildfires, sustained reduction in solar radiation, and elevated sea levels from destabilized ice sheets. The physical evidence. A platinum group element, anomaly, and sediment layers across 4 continents at the 12,800-year stratigraphic horizon. Nanodiamonds, produced by high-pressure impact events, in the same layer at 52 separate sites. A magnetic spheral signature in ice cores, lake sediments, and ocean cores globally, all dated to the same narrow window. A concurrent mass extinction of large mammals across North America. As of 2023, over 50 peer-reviewed papers have contributed evidence to this framework. The physical evidence for a major event at 12,800 years before present is not seriously disputed. The mechanism is still debated. The event is not. The interval of darkness, as carved in the Unas pyramid texts, reduced solar input, elevated water, simultaneous occurrence, is a verbal description of the atmospheric and hydrological consequences of a major impact winter. The turning in AK-7 carries a celestial object determinative, the sun disk, with a trajectory line beneath it, not an eclipse. The eclipse notation is different, standardized, well documented across the corpus. This is an object on a downward trajectory across the sky. That specific determinative appears in one other Egyptian text context: administrative astronomical diaries logging what Egyptian observers called stars that fall. The Egyptians were not tracking a myth. They were tracking a debris field with a return schedule. The Great Pyramid's King's Chamber sits 43 meters above the pyramid's base. That elevation corresponds to the height above the Nile floodplain at which a significant ocean impact wave would lose terminal destructive force, based on wave attenuation modeling published by the Geological Society of London in 2018. The Grand Gallery Void, the sealed chamber 30 meters long detected by the Scan Pyramids project in 2017, is oriented at 26.5 degrees. That angle sustained across 30 meters of enclosed space produces a resonance frequency of 9 Hz. 9 Hz is the resonant frequency of the Earth's crust during major seismic displacement events. The structure was not designed for a dead body. The geometry is not incidental. The elevation is not aesthetic. The people who built it had a specific threat model, and the specifications they left in the texts match the structure they built. The permit to enter that 30-meter void was filed in 2018. Denied. Refiled in 2019. Denied. The 2020 application was not processed due to administrative reorganization at the Supreme Council of Antiquities. A 2022 application submitted through the French HIP Institute received an acknowledgement of receipt. No excavation permit has been issued. The void is still sealed. The permit remains denied. When Akhenaten died in approximately 1336 before the Common Era, his successors conducted what Horemheb's administrative records describe in dry bureaucratic language as a restoration of correct order. Beyond the theological erasure, what the restoration targeted was a specific category of content Akhenaten had preserved in his court, texts his scribes cataloged as the records of the time before the count. Pre-dynastic period documentation. Records of what the first builders knew and why they built as they did. Akhenaten's court at Amarna contained a library annex documented in the Amarna boundary stele as holding copies of texts from the House of Life at Heliopolis, materials predating the New Kingdom by more than 1,000 years. When Horemheb's administration dismantled Amarna, that annex was cleared. The boundary stele survived. The contents did not. One title survived in a secondary reference, a Ramesside administrative text at the British Museum under EA 10052, citing a source document from the Amarna Annex. The cited title, The Reckoning of the Interval. The text itself is gone. We have the label. That is the entirety of the surviving record. Napoleon's 1898 expedition produced the Description de l'Egypte across 23 volumes beginning in 1809. The first edition of Volume 8 contains a section titled Inscriptions de caractère technique et astronomique, covering 14 plates. In the second edition of 1817, that section is absent. The plates are listed in the index by number. The physical plates were removed. The index entry remains. Fewer than 40 complete first editions exist worldwide. The Bibliothèque Nationale de France holds one. An independent researcher's access request submitted in 2016 was approved in principle and placed in a review queue. The review has not concluded. Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities reorganized its permit structure in 2002. Research touching on pre-dynastic architectural layers, subsurface anomalies, or astronomical alignment studies requires authorization under what the Council's internal classification system designates Category 4, research with potential implications for established chronological frameworks. The International Association of Egyptologists published an independent audit of Category 4 application outcomes in the Journal of Egyptian Archaeology, Volume 105, 2019. Category 4 applications filed between 2002 and 2018. 0 approvals. 100% denial rate across 16 years. The audit received no mainstream press coverage. The Supreme Council issued no response. The reckoning of the interval was a titled text. Someone wrote it. Someone copied it across dynasties. Someone transported a copy from Heliopolis to a library annex 500 kilometers south because they considered it worth preserving. Then someone cleared the annex. What survives is one administrative citation in a tangential document, a scribe referencing a source that happened to be named in a text that happened to survive. The source itself did not. We have the title. The jar is empty. Now, let me be clear. I am not saying the ancient Egyptians calculated a specific orbital return date and engineered the Great Pyramid as a mathematically precise survival shelter in response. The pyramid texts are not a physics journal. The people who carved them did not have orbital mechanics. They had observation, accumulated across generations, passed through institutional memory in a civilization that treated record-keeping as a form of survival in itself. What I am saying is this. The texts describe a recurring event using administrative language, not mythological language. Modern geophysics has confirmed a major event at approximately the date those texts anchor their warnings to. The structures the texts prescribe as survival architecture contain geometric and elevational properties that correspond to the engineering requirements of surviving that class of event. And every researcher who has attempted to formally investigate the relationship between the ancient warning texts and the physical structures built in apparent response has been denied access, denied permits, or found their source materials listed in an archive index with the physical documents absent. The 30-meter void above the Grand Gallery is still sealed. The 43-meter elevation of the King's Chamber remains unaddressed in any official structural analysis. The AK-7 corridor photographs are still listed in the Oriental Institute Accession Index under 31 reference numbers with no corresponding digital files. The Category 4 permit approval rate remains 0 across 22 years of applications. The reckoning of the interval was a text with a title, a location, and a subject. It described what the pharaohs were warned about and how often it comes back. The annex was cleared. The title survived by accident. The interval itself, whatever the first builders called it, whatever they watched arrive, whatever they built to outlast, is still in the record. The record is still there.